from a Crypto Astrology Group CAG member webinar with William Stickevers.
Notice what's happening with this eclipse. Notice this big eclipse, right? In late March, right on Bitcoin's moon. Look at Saturn sitting right over the ascendant. Does that indicate Bitcoin's imploding? No, not at all. All of this Pisces pretty much sitting on the Bitcoin Uranus, Saturn still within striking distance of the Bitcoin Uranus, and then this eclipse in Aries world point right on the Bitcoin moon. So all of that would indicate lots of action is about to happen. We're going to see transformation where we see the first state like Arizona or Utah will come out and say we have a state strategic Bitcoin / crypto reserve. That is coming. I expect that pretty soon. Like we already have 27 states that already have bills submitted in their legislature. So once the first one, it's going to be like a domino effect for the rest of them. So federal seized Bitcoin will also be used, not just in Washington. All these different departments have federally seized Bitcoin. That will be part of the strategic reserve. And then Loomis went on to say there would be a transformation of old gold certificates into Bitcoin. So all the old gold certificates, which are still valued at the 1970s price, which is around $42 per ounce, will be shifted into the Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now, let's say they do have the votes. She claims they have the votes. I believe they have the votes. But she said that if Congress dilly-dallies, Trump can still force the issue with executive action, which would be followed by an act of Congress. He doesn't want to do that, and he probably won't need to because Bitcoin's going to have a lot of wind behind its sail with this eclipse coming up, which will be disruptive but very innovative and breakthrough. So again, when I see the Bitcoin price down, it's like, what? I don't, why is everyone freaking out about this? Like, I'm fine with it. In fact, just so you know what I did when I hit the 200-day moving average and it was bouncing off around that $81,000, $82,000, I just said, let me increase my dollar cost averaging daily. I mean, buying Bitcoin daily. Let me double it because I know like this eclipse coming, strategic Bitcoin reserve, and all these other things are going to go into, we're going to see an acceleration of Bitcoin's S-curve adoption model. So the adoption of new technologies follows an S-curve. We know this historically, where the initial adoption is slow, then it rapidly accelerates before stabilizing. So we're at 3% adoption right now as of February 2025. So if you look at it, this infers, just the model in itself infers mass adoption, global adoption, 50+% adoption can occur over the next 7 years. And of course you'll say, but William, where's all the Bitcoin? I'm now finally doing the math. And I just figured if there's at least 1.2 billion people, let's say there's 2 billion middle-class people, and they finally get into it, not including all the sovereign wealth funds and all the different central banks, where's all that Bitcoin going to come from, right? And people will not be buying Bitcoin, they'll be buying Satoshis. So the question you need to ask yourself is not what the value of Bitcoin will be in 2030. The question is what will be the value of one Satoshi? That's how we need to be thinking. Now, let's go back to Doge, right? I showed here, someone said, hey, William, is it possible Doge may be like the winner, at least in the altcoins? Not that it will supersede Bitcoin's total market capitalization, but it will be like the one that no one saw coming. And I'm not saying it absolutely will be. I'm just saying like right now, in terms of a coin that people would use for retail purposes, look at this eclipse coming right on Doge's Uranus. It's a very powerful alignment there. Does that imply Doge is going to go down? Well, what does the black box say? Here's where we're at today. Look at that. Looks like Doge is going to be having a good year. And when I ran Doge against the modern portfolio theory, right, I said, all right, fine. Let's just say I'm going to hold Bitcoin and Doge using modern portfolio theory, using Sortino ratio. The Sortino ratio says if something is more volatile, right, the volatility implies high valuation over time. Something like a stock, you would use a Sharpe ratio. If it's a regular stock like Ford Motor Company, you would use Sharpe ratio. But if you're going to use tech, AI, robotics, crypto, you're going to look at the Sortino ratio, meaning, yeah, there's much more volatility, but the upside of the volatility is much greater than the downside. That's what it measures. So we look at that. When we look at the Sortino ratio max, it's saying if you invest 82% Bitcoin, 18% in Doge, right? You have $100,000. $82,000 goes into Bitcoin, $18,000 goes into Doge. You'll perform much better than if you kept all the money in Bitcoin or kept all the money in Doge. You'll get maximum returns. and you'll have the highest upside stability. In other words, that's like the perfect ratio for that combination. And the weighted risk for Doge and Bitcoin is only 0.491. That's pretty good. When you compare it to Ripple, everyone's saying, no, I'm going back to Ripple, William. Ripple went up a lot. It's going to win. And it's like, well, why? When you look at the weighted risk model, it's saying, hey, Ripple has much more weighted risk. If we had the same ratio, 82 to 18% for Bitcoin and Ripple, much riskier. Now, for some people, they don't care. But my point is, this is what I do in my mind, of course, using the astrology as well. But this is what I do. And I go, okay, if it's between XRP and Doge, there's no contest. It's over. Where's all the kiddie 25-year-old money? They're putting it in Doge. The 65-year-olds are putting it into XRP. I don't know why. But the 65-year-olds don't seem to understand that the weighted risk is much lower for Doge than it is for XRP. So I wanted to answer that question because a lot of you asked that question. Now, this Saturn-Neptune World Point conjunction I've been hammering over and over again, hopefully you get it by now, is saying that tokenization is coming. Everything is going to be tokenized. So here's the thing. If Bitcoin becomes a strategic reserve asset, would that imply everything else is going to be tokenized? Like, in other words, the US dollar is sort of like a certificate, like an ETF, if you will, an ETF certificate against an actual tradable asset, right? So an ETF like Vanguard S&P 500 is a certificate, a digital certificate that is a proxy of the 500 stocks on the S&P that trade daily. And let's assume for the moment that you actually could hold the physical paper of the stock like they did in the old days. So if Bitcoin becomes a strategic asset, then that would mean that the tokenization of everything else is coming over the next, the next 2 years. They're going to start tokenizing everything. So major players like BlackRock have signaled they're going to begin tokenization of all financial instruments, and that many financial institutions are ready to back many projects, not just the original cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin. So we can expect countless experiments with Dogecoin and the tokenization of all these different assets to flourish, because the legal risk once haunting the altcoins or haunting Wall Street has completely, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. So again, going back to the Bitcoin strategic reserve, you could see here, there are strategic reserves, right? The grain reserve established in the 30s, the cheese reserve, right? They have a strategic petroleum reserve, 1974, 600 million barrels, strategic national stockpile, 1999, and then now the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So when you factor all of this in, and then you factor in Bitcoin short-term price target range, like the short-term, right? Now, this is the low level, Bitcoin hitting 180,000 as part of its next post-halving run, likely peaking near 2025. So it's like saying, okay, the short term is around 180,000 or 173 in this case. Like right now, let's assume Bitcoin consolidates around 80,000 and then starts moving. And then by the time we get 500 plus days into the post-halving, it's around 173,000. Now, as I've shown, it's likely to be over that amount, because we're going to have the prospects of a Bitcoin strategic reserve, which is going to require that the United States buys Bitcoin on a regular basis. And once that happens, what are we going to see? Other institutions, other countries. So therefore, Bitcoin's midterm price target, where Bitcoin captures approximately 50% of gold's speculative market cap, right now it's 16%. So let's say it gets closer to 50%. We're talking about a Bitcoin price nearing 450,000. Now, it's a little bit higher than what I showed earlier, but this is where Bitcoin becomes a digital analog to gold. So Arizona is moving forward with the Bitcoin legislation. These are all the states here, and we're getting more confirmation that the Czech central bank boss is planning to buy billions in Bitcoin for reserves. So he's thinking ahead, acquiring 7.3 billion in Bitcoin. Now, again, how much Bitcoin is out there? It's only 2.5 million Bitcoin. So if you're Trump and you're like, hey, listen, the Czechs, they're going to move ahead. All these states are going to move ahead. They're going to start buying up Bitcoin. You got to remember one thing. Arizona has a bigger economy than Italy. Texas has a bigger economy than France. So when we're saying they're going to buy, these economies in these states are bigger than most European power or most countries in the world for that matter. So the demand for Bitcoin is going to increase exponentially this year. And of course, the pressure will be on to like, no. The US federal system, since the whole goal here was to have the dollar be backed by Bitcoin, because I keep pointing this out. Look, 6.6% of all the Bitcoin that will ever be produced, not mined yet, will be the only Bitcoin available. So 17%'s been lost. There's just not enough Bitcoin for everything.
For nearly 4 decades, William Stickevers has empowered business leaders, independent thinkers, and visionaries to navigate global shifts and critical turning points with clarity and confidence. His unique blend of advanced astrological techniques, macroeconomic insights, and strategic forecasting equips clients to stay ahead of the curve and thrive in uncertain times. Discover how William's in-depth forecasts, programs, and astrological consultations can help you make more confident, well-timed decisions and recognize opportunities others overlook. Visit williamstickevers.com for your strategic advantage in business, finances, and life.